everybody, Mike Griffith here of Dog Nation, ready for today's Ingles on the Beat segment. And obviously we have a lot to talk about today. I'm going to try not to rush through it. Usually I come in here like a ball of fire. Not today. Today requires some thought and a more gentle pace, a little bit more easing into some things, because not everything was good news. There's still great news if you're a Georgia football fan. In fact, I've just finished a radio interview and predicted once again that I believe Georgia will win the Southeastern Conference. And I believe the Bulldogs are still a national championship contender. Now, there's a really good story up by Connor Riley that will show you how important it is from a numbers perspective to have some go-to guys on the perimeter. And I certainly would agree with Connor's research there. It's hard to deny you better have some reliable targets. But I think that things are a little bit different in this instance because of the way Kirby A has recruited, but B also the transfers that are on the team. The graduate transfer phenomena that's happened and how well Georgia has done at finding really good receivers to come and play in Sanford Stadium. I want to start out by something that I saw from Tim Tebow, and I know that Tebow is somewhat of a divisive figure, especially with Georgia fans because he played for the Florida Gators, and usually anything and everything Florida get you an immediate thumbs down in these parts. I think Tebow's different. I like what Tebow stands for. I enjoyed my exchanges with him as a beat writer, and certainly even now that Tim works for ESPN and College Game Day, I'm pulling for Tim Tebow to make it. Maybe also because I was a Denver Broncos fan, and he did beat the Pittsburgh Steelers in the playoffs, which I still think was one of the most awesome things that ever happened, to borrow a Tebow word. But so I listen to Tebow without any type of filter. I think he speaks from the heart. I think he's genuine, and like him or not, he gives you his opinion. I think he's a lot like David Pollack in that respect, frankly. And what Tebow said was that Georgia football was ahead of schedule, and I thought that was really, I thought it was admirable that he pointed that out, because what you don't hear in a lot of these conversations, in the Georgia-Alabama conversation, is what Kirby Smart has done so quickly and how fast Georgia elevated to become the best team in the country his second season. Georgia was the best team in the country in 2017. Doesn't mean that they're going to win the playoff, okay? What we're seeing now with longer seasons, 15-game seasons, I think the best team in the regular season doesn't always win the playoff. There are other factors. Who you have to play in the first round of the playoff, where you have to play. Both of those things worked against Georgia when we reflect back. Having to play Oklahoma instead of a bad Clemson team, and then having to fly all the way to Los Angeles instead of traveling closer to New Orleans. And oh, by the way, Alabama essentially got a bye by not having to play in the SEC championship game, so they had one less game on their bodies, okay? That's the spilt milk of 2017, and Tebow even says in the story that Georgia probably should have won the national championship, and I would agree, Georgia was the best team. They didn't win that night. That's been well documented, but we move on to last year, and you could make the case that Georgia should have beat Alabama again. They had the tie down by 2 touchdowns. DeAndre Walker goes out. I feel like I'm saying the same things every time, but to back up Tebow's point, Georgia has had Alabama dead to rights, because the other comment he made was that Georgia needs to beat Alabama now, or that's going to kind of become a thing. All right? Sometimes things become a thing. You start to, somebody in somebody else's head, right? Georgia fans know that for years and years, Florida thought they had a thing over Georgia. They were in Georgia's head. Now, because Alabama's beat Georgia in back-to-back years, they think they're in Georgia's head. It's not that, all right? It's that Alabama had players that made plays, and Georgia failed to execute in the clutch. Nobody's in anybody's head. I'm around Kirby Smart and those players enough to know where that confidence level is at and what they believe. And I can tell you that Kirby Smart does not make the season about Alabama. He does not have an Alabama countdown clock in the building. Nobody's in anybody's head at this stage. But Tebow's point is valid. If Alabama were to beat Georgia again, that narrative would accelerate rapidly. There's already some people who believe it. You see, when Kirby goes on the Paul Feinbaum show, Paul likes to ask Kirby a lot about it. You know, and Kirby responds coolly and calmly and says, no, that's just not how we look at it at Georgia. But that narrative is going to stay out there. But the other part that came out that I thought it was so valuable, and what Georgia fans should really consider what Tebow said, was that what happened the previous 2 years was ahead of schedule. This was the year that we would point to and say, this is when we think Georgia should compete for the national title. If you look at the maturity level, you've got a third-year starting quarterback. Kirby Smart has completely settled in as the head coach. He's going into his fourth year. He's got a full cycle now of Kirby recruits, guys that were recruited to play in this scheme. And don't underestimate that. One thing I took from my talk with Mel Tucker in California at the national championship game site was that a lot of what Georgia had been doing defensively was out of necessity because it had to do with the personnel. Right? Now Georgia has more players in that back seven that I believe can do more things. So you add Kirby in there with his ratcheted up intensity, in with the talent that they've recruited to play in these specific schemes, and I think you're going to see Georgia do a lot more things defensively, hence the havoc that Kirby Smart has talked about his defense creating this season. In past years, they haven't done as much in that front seven in terms of exotic looks and blitzes as I think they're going to be capable of doing now with the talent and the depth and the experience that they have in that back seven. So, getting back to Tebow's point, I do think that there is some urgency this year. I think it's because of the window. I think you're going to lose a lot of players on offense, as 8 or 9 players probably to the NFL draft. And having a third-year starting quarterback gives you an opportunity to do some special things. So just following up on that Tebow story and confirming why I still believe Georgia's going to win the Southeastern Conference, it's because of the offensive line. It's because of Jake Fromm being a third-year starter. And it's because of what Kirby's going to be able to do on defense this year that he hasn't been able to do because of the personnel in the previous 3 seasons. So those are the things that I look at across the board. Now, the one elephant in the room that I haven't brought up, obviously we know that Jeremiah JJ Holloman was dismissed from the team on Friday. Connor Riley first to have that up. Myself and other people have done several follow-ups on this and looked at how this would affect the team, the depth at wide receiver, how it will affect the scheme. I thought Eric Zier had a very great point and deep analysis on this when he said, look, the offensive line is still there, the run game is there. These defenses are still going to have to play man-to-man coverage. Now, you would have loved for Jeremiah J.J. Holloman to be one of the receivers out there in man, but Georgia still has other receivers that can win man-to-man battles. And because of this offensive line and because of this talent in the backfield, they're going to be able to overcome the loss of J.J. Holloman. J.J. was going to be the leading returning receiver, a very talented guy as we know, but with him gone now, Georgia's got to look for other options. And a couple options that I think are really key that really need to step up with J.J. gone are transfers. And to me, this is where Lawrence Cager, the transfer from Miami, becomes very important to Georgia. Now, Lawrence was the leading receiver for Miami in terms of yards per catch and touchdown catches last season when he was at the U. This is in a year where Miami had a quarterback situation going on that really hampered their passing game. So his numbers, they don't look fantastic. They don't look like anything you'd write home about. But remember the type of offense that he was playing in. The year before, he was just less than 1 year removed away from a torn ACL that he suffered in summer drills. And Lawrence was very candid with me when I went to Miami and did the interviews with him and said, look, that first year I was back from the knee, I really wasn't back mentally. I was out there, but I had some doubts. He said, it's hard when you're coming off a knee to trust. You tell yourself you're going to be okay, but it's just not the same. So really last year was his first year back healthy, and he was dealing with a quarterback situation. He comes in this year, and I think this immediately puts Lawrence under the microscope. It's interesting or coincidental, whatever word you want to use. Lawrence was actually hosted by JJ Holloman when he came up here to visit prior to deciding on Georgia for his grad transfer school. And JJ, actually, when he visited Miami, was hosted by Lawrence. These two were going to room together at Georgia when Lawrence moved up here. So there is a coincidence to that. I don't know, coincidence or how you'd put it, but the bottom line is now a lot of this is going to fall on Lawrence Cager to be one of those perimeter threats, to win those one-on-one matchups. What you like about him is that he's a legit 6'5", 220, and when he was in high school, he was high jumping, I want to say 7 feet. He's got a 40-inch vertical jump, and you don't see many 6'5" guys with a 40-inch vertical, and that's why Lawrence is already on the NFL radar and why the Senior Bowl, Jim Nagy's already tweeted out about Lawrence being one of the 4 or 5 guys. I saw he had a Charlie Warner lately that the Senior Bowl is scouting. Also Bryant Herring in that mix, J.R. Reed, and Rodrigo Blankenship, the other ones. So transfer, Lawrence Cager, the most obvious ones. Nobody's forgotten about Demetrius Robertson. Everybody remembers Demetrius Robertson, right? Demetrius didn't catch a pass last year, but Demetrius didn't have a healthy spring football practice session. Demetrius was coming off that injury at Cal his sophomore year. I think he hurt it in the second or the third game. Remember, Demetrius was a freshman All-American. He was on the Football Writers freshman All-American team. I picked that team, and I remember his numbers and his highlights. He was phenomenal at Cal. Now, the Pac-12 is a different type of conference. I think it's easier for a freshman to come in and make an impact. But last year, Demetrius was not ready physically to compete. And Kirby told us that. And let's remember, that Georgia receiving corps last year was a lot better than the numbers suggest. The numbers could have been a lot greater if Georgia was throwing the ball in the fourth quarter of a lot of those games, but Kirby wasn't running the score up, and so that's why Riley Ridley led the team, I want to say off the top of my head, with 44 or 45 catches. Really not a lot relative to other leading receivers in the league. But you had 3 NFL receivers playing ahead of Demetrius Robertson last year in Riley Ridley and Terry Godwin and McCole Hardman. So it was going to be hard to crack that rotation, not to mention JJ Holloman, who I believe is an NFL talent. So it was hard for him to crack that talent as it was, much less with him not being completely healthy and with him not going through a spring drill session. And then you add to it Kirby Smart's insistence that these receivers play physical football on the perimeter. And I've said this, all these coaches say the same thing. They all say they want their receivers to block downfield. Kirby's not playing though. He's serious. If you don't block, you don't play. He doesn't care who you are. I mean, he's that coach. I mean, look, he doesn't care what your number is. He doesn't care how many catches you had, what preseason, all-access. If you're not blocking, you're not playing at Georgia. I mean, it is that way. Why? Because Kirby knows. He was on the other end. I mean, he was an all-SEC safety. He knows better than anyone what a pain these receivers can be when they get determined to block downfield. Kirby understands that a receiver blocking downfield is the difference between an 11-yard gain and a 65-yard game-changing, momentum-changing run. It comes down to how well these guys block downfield. How many times, and I'm sure most of you that are watching this, watch the Kirby Smart press conferences. We post a lot of those in our stories during the regular season. Pay attention to this because a lot of times it goes over people's heads, but we'll ask Kirby about that DeAndre Swift run or about that Bryant Herring touchdown. And he'll say, you know, that was great, guys, but what you didn't see or what you aren't talking about is that Charlie Warner block, right? Or that Terry Godwin block. And he'll take the conversation in that direction. Now, as a writer, you're frustrated because you're like, Kirby, I don't want to write about the block. I want to write about the run. I need a quote from you. Kirby doesn't care. What is it? Kirby doesn't play that, right? No. What you need to write about, Kirby's thinking, is the block, guys. That's what you don't understand. Anybody can run with open field in front of them. It's the block that is key. And he means business on this. So Demetrius Robertson, that was the test this spring, was could Demetrius Robertson win that trust from Kirby Smart enough on the perimeter and be physical enough? Because you look at him, he's not a big guy. I mean, he's an absolute flyer, but he's not a big physical presence kind of guy like a Riley Ridley or a Lawrence Cager or a JJ Holloman. He's just not that big. But could he get tough and scrappy like Tyler Simmons? And apparently he did. Now, we did not see Demetrius Robertson in the G-Day game. The rumor or the word was that he was sick. I think they want to keep him under wraps. I think he had a spectacular spring. And I think it even more because that's what Eric Zier told me. And Eric Zier knows. Eric Zier knows Georgia football. And if Eric Zier says that he expects Demetrius Robertson to have a big year, I'm on board. Because if there's one thing Eric Zier knows, it's quarterbacks, receivers, and passing game. So Lawrence Cager and Demetrius Robertson, these are 2 candidates, potential candidates for impact player or newcomer of the year in the SEC. Now, they probably won't get it. Their numbers won't be crazy. We all know what's going to happen. Georgia's going to roll it up on some of these teams, and Kirby's going to hand off in the fourth quarter. You're going to see young running backs carrying the ball. You're going to see Kenny McIntosh toting it. You're going to see Zamir White working his way back into shape and game football condition, I should say. We know that he's a workout warrior, but he hasn't played football in a while. He's going to need some carries to knock the rust off, game carries. So you're going to see those guys getting work in the fourth quarter, I believe, the games that Georgia's in control of. I don't think Kirby's going to suddenly decide to start running up the score a la Oklahoma or Alabama with the pass game. Some people might suggest that he should, but the flip side is that you don't want Jake Fromm getting hit. Stetson Bennett will get some work as well. We're still waiting on Dwan Mathis. They're still hopeful that Dwan can play this season. But in my mind, we're going to see a lot of handoffs in fourth quarters of games, a lot of these young running backs. So, and again, that plays to Zaire's point about that offensive line and just pounding it. Georgia's got great depth on the offensive line. You're going to see a lot of those young guys in a lot of the fourth quarters of games as well. You know, looking more at the depth, one of the reactionary stories I wrote was about who's going to step in now that JJ Holloman's gone. We talked a lot about Lawrence Cager and we talked a lot about Demetrius Robertson. I haven't given up yet on Matt Landers. I think Matt Landers made a lot of plays in the spring. Kirby talked a lot about Matt Landers. He's a big target. He's 6'5", 200. He wasn't consistent enough. I think he's going to get a lot of work with Jake this summer, and I think Matt Landers is going to have a chance to get back in the impact. And don't forget about the incoming freshmen, Dominic Blaylock and George Pickens. These are two guys that I think have a lot of talent. Blaylock in the slot particularly. Pickens maybe another deep perimeter threat. But there are a lot of options for Georgia. You know, you do lose your top 5 pass catchers from a year ago, but you bring in a guy like a George Pickens with that height and that size, and I don't know what they got him listed at, 6'2" or something. Listen, I saw him. He's bigger than that. He is long, and he looks lean. He looks like a flyer, and he looks like the kind of guy that can get deep and that can take it downfield. You know, we know he has a lot of talent, his ability to make runs after the catch. He did a lot of things last year playing high school football at Alabama. There's a reason that he's coming to Georgia. He wants to work his way in quickly. Now, typically with a pro style, as I said earlier, it takes a little bit longer. But I think James Coley can do some things to simplify and get guys like Blaylock and Pickens in the mix. Don't rule out Karis Jackson. I felt like he was a little bit in the doghouse in the spring as far as maybe not making the most of his opportunities based on some things that Kirby said. But, you know, the summer and the fall camp is going to present more opportunities for guys like Karis Jackson to get back in the rotation, compete for opportunities. So those are some guys, when I look at the receiving core, that even though you take JJ out of it, and even though you take your top 5 pass catchers out of it, because Isaac Nauta was in that mix too, you add enough transfer-wise, whether we're talking about Lawrence Cager, whether we're talking about Demetrius Robertson, and don't forget about Eli Wolf. You know, I don't think people should underestimate Eli Wolf. He's kind of in the mold of a Nauta. I'm not going to say that he can do the things that Isaac Nauta did. I think Isaac Nauta is a great talent. I think Isaac Nauta was an absolute steal for the Detroit Lions in the 7th round. I don't care what his 40 time was. I like Nauta. I like his ability to separate. Eli Wolf had a great spring in 2018 at Tennessee. He was the leading receiver in their spring game and had a touchdown catch. He had 5 catches for, I want to say, over 100 yards and a touchdown. And Jeremy Pruitt felt so good about Eli Wolf that he brought him to SEC Media Days last year. A year ago, Eli Wolf is the volunteer offensive guy going to Birmingham to represent the team. So what happened? Well, what happened was Pruitt wants and needs a big tight end because the Tennessee offensive line ain't Georgia's, and that's probably the understatement of the year. So he wanted him over 240 pounds, and Wolf dropped below 240. And Jeremy's a guy, when he puts his foot down, he means it. Now, Tennessee had gone out and signed a junior college guy, and that junior college guy stepped up and started getting a lot of the opportunities that Eli didn't get. And so that's why Eli, a former Tennessee captain, the guy they brought to Birmingham, Eli decided as a graduate transfer to come to Georgia, where he has a chance to compete for a championship and get some opportunities at the tight end position and play opposite of Charlie Werner. So that's a good situation for Georgia. I like John Fitzpatrick. I wouldn't be surprised if he makes an impact. I saw him at the Camp Sunshine event. Very impressed with him as well. His size is undeniable. So I think Georgia's going to be fine at tight end. I think there will be some drop-off at receiver, maybe not as much as maybe some people expect. But again, with that offensive line and a third-year quarterback, that's a lot to compensate for the loss of just one player. So even though Georgia lost Jeremiah JJ Holloman, and I do think it's a hit on their national title hopes, I still think they can win it, particularly if this leadership junket trip that they recently took if this accomplishes what it's intended to do and brings Jake and the other team leaders closer together, guys like a DeAndre Swift, Eric Stokes was on this trip. You look around and it was a very productive trip. They had the brain coach there, and I want to get his name, Moad, I believe is his name. I know Jeff Centel had written about him before. But this leadership trip, Trevor Moad, who once worked for Georgia, who also worked for Alabama, by the way, a guy that teaches leadership and teaches mental strength and mental conditioning, things like that. But this was a team building experience to bring all these guys together, and we put some pictures up of them. J.R. Reed, Eric Stokes, Richard LeCount, DeAndre Swift, Andrew Thomas, Solomon Kinley, key guys there. Aziz Alohare, Monty Rice was there, Tyler Clark. These are the players that are going to be the cornerstones and the leaders for Georgia. They got to come together. Right now in particular, a story I did today, I talked with Chris Doring, a former NFL receiver, played for a lot of NFL teams, played for 8 teams in like 11 years, obviously went to Florida before that. But Doring is so impressed with Fromm, he said Georgia couldn't ask for a better team leader to be leading these off-season workouts than a guy like Jake Fromm. And that's where Georgia's at right now. Kirby alluded to this. I mean, I'm not breaking news here. Kirby told us in Destin that what this team does this summer will determine their chances at winning a national championship. These off-season workouts that Jake has to put together to get everybody to show up, whether it's him and Stetson Bennett working with the receivers, or whether they're able to coordinate this with the defensive backs and linebackers and do from 7-on-7. This is going to be really important to Georgia to get on the same page. Now, it's true that you really don't know till the lights come on, but a lot can be done right now. There's a lot of nuance to how a receiver runs a route. And I'll have a story about that tomorrow as well, as we talk about what needs to happen on the field. Off the field, I believe that Georgia's margin for error is gone. We know what happened in the spring, 6 players in 6 weeks, relatively minor incidents compared with the JJ Holloman alleged domestic assault. That case is inactive, by the way. The girl did not want to press charges. There is a police report. But because JJ admitted to striking a woman, Kirby didn't have any choice, in his mind, obviously, but to let him go. I mean, this is kind of the way it is. But when I look deeper into this, there are other issues behind it. One, when I read the police, there weren't other Georgia teammates around on some of these nights out and when some of this stuff was going on. I know at other programs I've covered, and I'm sure it's happened at Georgia too, players look out for one another. They travel in groups of 2 or 3, and part of the reason why is to make sure that they're looking out for one another and taking each other out of bad situations. Now, I don't know if that would have made a difference in Holloman's situation or not, but I do know that I think that's an important facet, that Georgia does need to grow together a little bit more. I mean, there's a lot of superstar players, but they need to have that camaraderie outside the locker room as well as inside the locker room and on the football field. So, to me, that's something that's going to be very important moving forward. When we talk about leadership, it's not just calling the guys in the huddle and calling the right play. It's spotting that teammate that may be in a bad situation and pulling him in and getting him the help that he needs. And I think that this offseason, if nothing else, has given Kirby a lot of opportunities to teach. And we know he's talked with the team since the Holloman deal. I think everybody understands now, when something happens, you got to tell the coaching staff and to remove yourself from these potential situations. I mean, this incident probably cost Holloman and his family millions of dollars. We're talking about livelihoods and careers on the line here, and young people. You mix. Yes, young people are going to make mistakes, but there's some mistakes you can't make. Some mistakes you don't get a second chance from, and that's why this leadership, this team camaraderie, and guys looking out for each other becomes so important. Because these Georgia players are out there, certainly in a town like Athens, everybody knows who they are. I want to go to your questions now, your comments. And see if there's anything that I need to address or follow up on here on the Ingles on the Beat segment. It's obviously been a very newsy weekend for us at Dog Nation, newsier than you would think for the month of June. I guess it's been since last week. when I did Camp Sunshine, and just what an impressive display that was to see those Georgia athletes out there and the difference that they were making in the lives of those young cancer-stricken patients. I can't tell you how moved I was by that whole experience out there in Rutledge, Georgia, and what a great charity that is, and to see Kirby that involved and meet his brother Carl and hear the story of the Smart family, that was really inspirational. And to see Jake, guys like Jake and DeAndre Swift out there, Lawrence Cager out there, a newcomer to the team, and he's already out there jumping into these events. Eli Wolf, it was really inspirational, like I said, to see these players interacting with these young cancer and the difference that they make in the lives of these young people is just remarkable. So I think that's great that Kirby's made this an annual deal now. You had probably more than half the team there. My guess is moving forward you'll have even more Georgia Bulldogs out there making a difference in the lives of these young people and doing the type of community service that should make all of the Georgia football fans really proud of the caliber of people and the messages and the lessons that Kirby is teaching on this Georgia football team. Jason wants to know any updates on Dwan Mathis. Not really. I mean, I think I told you when this first broke that Dwan was signed up for, I think, about a month of antibiotics, and then they were going to see what happened. I think we're still in a little bit of a wait-and-see mode. There is some guarded optimism over there. Kirby is standing behind Dwan Mathis and Coley's standing behind him. Mr. Mathis, Terrence, came down, I want to say about a week and a half ago and had an opportunity to see his son. A lot of people didn't know this, but Terrence was in the hospital himself when all this was happening, and he'd asked me not to mention it then because he didn't want any of the attention or focus to be on him, but he has since gotten out of the hospital himself. So for father and son to see one another was a very special thing, and Terrence couldn't thank Kirby and Coley and Ron Corson enough. I mean, this is life-changing stuff. I don't know, what am I doing? I should be somewhere writing a book on this kind of stuff, because what Georgia did and how they handled that Dwan Mathis situation was incredible. It was handled incredibly well. And talking with Terrence and hearing the joy in his voice and just how thankful he is to Georgia, how thankful he is to Piedmont Hospital in Athens and the medical staff and the fan base for all their positive thoughts and prayers. That's all he can talk about. He's just such a thankful guy. It would seem to me, if you're a parent, obviously you'd be concerned. You might say, why me? But I haven't heard that once from the Mathis family. Dwan has tackled this full go. The teammates are all behind him. And I'm looking forward to watching Dwan's career play out at Georgia. I think he's going to have an inspirational tale to tell. Let me go back in here into our Ingles on the Beat thread. Stop into Ingles today for the best meat in town. It's out there. Leon Hutchinson says, what are you almost positive of, Leon? I need to see that. And Jeremy Chapman is right. The charges are a moot point. Kirby has outlined that behavior is not acceptable. And that's why they don't believe in second chances. Some things there's second chances for, and some things in our society that there's not. Let's see if there's any more questions out there that you'd like me to address. If you have any questions about Georgia football, now's the time to put it in here. I'm going to do this podcast and jump in my car and get back on 360. I think I can find my way back to Athens now without a GPS. It only took a year. I kid. Sometimes with the traffic, though, I look for alternative routes, right? I get out the road map. I need to just stop that and just realize and just accept it, that sometimes it's going to take a little bit longer to get from Georgia, from Atlanta to Athens, or Athens to Georgia. So, yeah, Philip Jordan Wells is right. There are a lot of guys that are waiting to play, waiting to commit. One person goes out, it's an opportunity for someone else. And right now, Georgia is a place where the best talent in the country wants to come. They want to play for this coaching staff. They want to play for championships. They take heed in stories like the Dwan Mathis story. Parents see that and they say, you know what? That's where I want my kid. I want my kid somewhere where they have a top-notch training staff and a guy like Ron Corson overseeing it, or where they have a Piedmont Hospital, Athens Piedmont Hospital, which ranks, one of the top 1,000 hospitals in the world, one of only 7 hospitals in Georgia. that are on that list, located right there in Athens to take care of these Georgia football players should their situation get serious enough. They want a coach like Kirby Smart who's going to handle this personally. This situation with Dwan Mathis was not delegated down to an assistant. This was the head football coach dealing with this personally, on the phone, making sure that things got taken care of from the onset. Now, other people got involved. James Coley got involved. Ron Corson certainly was involved in the medical end. But the fact that Kirby handled this himself, that Kirby made the phone calls, is what blew Terrence Mathis away. I mean, Kirby Smart, as busy as he was with recruiting, as busy as he was with SEC Spring, all that got put aside immediately for the health of a true freshman player who likely wasn't going to play a whole lot. Now, Dwan's a very important piece to the puzzle, but it wasn't like it's DeAndre Swift or Jake Fromm. But to Kirby, it didn't matter. And that's what Terrence kept saying. He kept saying, Mike, it's like Kirby was treating my son like he was his own son. And I think that was telling. Kirby's never come out and said that. Kirby's not preached that. Kirby didn't hold a press conference or put out a release. This wasn't Kirby telling everybody, this is just what happened. Okay? He didn't do it for effect. He didn't do it for recruiting. He did it because this is how he cares about his program, because he's a former Bulldog himself. He's going to make decisions for Georgia that are the best for Georgia, whether it's for his players or for his administration or it's for his fan base, whatever. And that's what makes this whole Kirby Smart thing so unique. And this is why other SEC schools, when they look deep into Georgia, they get nervous. They're trembling. Because Georgia does have a dynasty in the making. Kirby's making some great decisions, and some great players are coming here. So yes, there's some adversity with JJ's dismissal, and there was some adversity this spring. But these are things that the right type of leadership and the right type of kids are going to learn from. These are going to be cautionary tales for the next 2, 3, 4 years when players come in. There's going to be a player that's going to say, hey man, I was here when this happened, and this is why you don't do A, B, and C. You know, we've been through it, right? And sometimes those best lessons are the toughest lessons. And I do think the players are going to take a lot and learn a lot from this. Let's take a look here. Any more questions here for On the Beat? I'm looking. Guys, if you got anything else you want to hit me with, hit me now. I did think Brandon Adams, I guess before I go, I thought Brandon Adams had a great sit down with Greg McGarity. If you haven't seen it, you absolutely, positively have to watch this. This is a must-watch video that Brandon did. It's a must-read story on his conversation with Greg McGarity for you to wrap your brain around what's going on at Georgia with the series in Jacksonville and why Kirby wants it to be more of a home and home with recruiting. And I've talked to so many people about this, and everyone has such a strong opinion because it's been such a great rivalry. It will still be a great rivalry even when it's a home and home. The question, it's very simple to me. It boils down to this. Do you want Kirby Smart to do everything possible to win a national championship? Yes or no? It's yes or no. Don't say, well, he's done it, we can get by without. Do you want him to do everything possible to win a national championship? Are you, as a fan, willing to accept any decision that it takes to win a national championship? Because Kirby Smart believes that that recruiting weekend is that important. And you can say, well, he's been third without, he's been second with. Do you want him to do everything possible to win a national championship? That's what it comes down to, because that's what Kirby Smart's geared for. Now, he's going to represent Georgia right. He's going to take care of the image of the program. You saw how he takes care of his players, right? But if you hire a guy to do a task, you let him do it. And I think Kirby Smart has earned that in his first 3 years with what he's shown you and what he's been able to accomplish ahead of schedule, as Tim Tebow said. So to me, that's when push comes to shove, that's where the conversation stops. Is Kirby going to work for a school that they're going to hire him and they're going to give him the green light to do everything it takes to win a national title, or they're going to put provisions in front of him? You can do everything but this. You can do everything but that. No. That wasn't what they said. They said, well, Kirby, we want you to win a national title, but you got to make sure you take care of those fans that like to go down there on vacation once a year. No, they didn't say that. So to me, that's what I keep coming back to, is Kirby Smart's mentality. This is a no BS guy, man. I'm telling you, I was over there when I came in here and I saw those guys coming off the practice field. This heat in Athens is paralyzing. That's the word for it. paralyzing. 88 feels like 99. That 11 degrees comes from some seriously paralyzing humidity. That stuff's leaking over into August. And I'm watching those Georgia Bulldogs come off the field in full gear. And I mean, grasping. These guys are playing football and training in it. Like they're, Army Rangers, Special Forces. I couldn't believe it. I said, you got to be kidding me. They were out there in full gear in that stuff? I mean, without a doubt, they were the best conditioned football team going into last season. South Carolina found that out on a hot day in Columbia. Remember that game? Kirby works these guys hard. Nobody's taking any shortcuts, right? Why would he take a shortcut with recruiting? Why would he give up the most valuable recruiting weekend every other year? He wouldn't. He doesn't want to. Now, it's not about pulling the game from Athens or pulling the game from Jacksonville. It's about doing what he can to recruit. It's about doing the best he can for Georgia to get the best players that it takes to win a national title. And you might say, well, Mike, it's only one or two or three guys. Well, you know what? The last time I checked, these last two Alabama-Georgia games have been decided by one or two or three guys. That's my take on that. That's how I feel about it. We'll see what happens. We'll see how it plays out. We'll see if Kirby Smart gets what he wants or if the boosters that want to go to Jacksonville get their way over the head coach. Fans I've seen are kind of split on it. Some fans like it, some fans don't, but the fans are not split on supporting Kirby Smart. That's one thing I have noticed. Who do I see as the top wide receiver this year? Man, David, that is tough because I see a lot of possibilities. I want to see how Lawrence runs, okay? He did have the knee injury 2 years ago. He is 6'5" and 220. I want to see what type of separation he gets. Jake is not a guy that likes to throw into coverage. And it takes time. Now, eventually, like you saw with JJ, Jake got to the point where he was willing to throw the ball up and let a guy make a play. Jake would much rather find a matchup where a guy's running open. But with a guy like Lawrence at 6'5", 220 who can elevate that 40-inch vertical, how quick is Jake going to build the trust with Lawrence? So that's really important with Lawrence because he's got the size. He's certainly got the jumping ability. What are his hands going to be like? How consistent is he going to be with his hands here at Georgia? That's another thing. So it could be Cager. Demetrius Robertson with that ability to separate. One, where's he going to line up? So we know that Demetrius started as a perimeter guy. He got moved inside and was playing a little bit more in the slot in the spring. But now, does Georgia move Robertson back outside? And maybe this pushes Blaylock into a little bit more immediate playing time in the slot? Maybe does James Cook go in the slot a little bit more? Maybe you borrow a little bit out of your backfield depth. And it's not like James Cook can't play both running back and in the slot, but that's a weapon that has not been unleashed fully to his capability. I think this is the year James Cook gets on the map and does some special things. I think the leading receiver, this is going to sound crazy, you ready for this? I think the leading receiver is going to be DeAndre Swift. If you go back and look, in terms of numbers, okay, in terms of catches, I think DeAndre, I want to say he had 32 catches last year. So while they lost their top 5 receivers in terms of yardage, I think DeAndre was in the top 5 in catches with 32 or something to that number. Again, I don't have these stats in front of me, so forgive me if I'm 1 or 2 off or 3 off for that matter. But I think DeAndre Swift could lead the team in catches. I think Brian Herrien will catch some footballs. But if you're looking at the most productive receiver, that's hard for me to guess. I need to see more from Lawrence. I need to see more from Demetrius Robertson and find out where they're going to line him up. This might surprise people. I'm not writing off Tyler Simmons, and I'll tell you why. I like Tyler's toughness. Not only was he a team leader, but I like his toughness. I would watch the pregame warm-ups last year at Sanford Stadium on the road, and Tyler's wearing this huge shoulder brace. I'm thinking, my gosh, did he get in a car accident or something? No, he just got a bad shoulder, and he's playing. So I see him without the pads in the warm-ups. Okay, that's why I saw this huge contraption he was wearing. And I know that it's under his pads when he's playing, and he's still playing, and he's still blocking downfield. That's a tough guy, okay? That's a guy that Kirby believes in. That's a guy that's got equity. And Kirby even said that in the spring, that he knew what to expect from JJ and Tyler. Tyler's going to be on the field a lot, and I think he's got the potential to surprise. Will he be the top receiving threat? I don't know that. Again, I don't know what's happening on those fields right now over there back in Athens. A couple miles from where I live. I don't know what's going on between Jake and his receiver group. I don't know who's coming to the workouts, who's staying late. I would guess they're all coming to the workouts, but I don't know who Jake's starting to get a good vibe with or a good feel for. I don't know that. But I know that the work is being put in. That much I do know. I know that in fall drills, Kirby Smart is going to go over that position with a fine-tooth comb, and he probably still won't be. Kirby won't be happy with anything. You all know that. Doesn't matter how good it goes, Kirby's never happy with it. He's never satisfied. That's what he'll tell you. He'll like a direction, but he's never satisfied. That's not the type of coach he is. They can always get better, okay? But to your point, the leading receiver, if I had to guess, I would say that Swift will have more catches than anyone else. That's kind of a cop-out, but it's kind of the safe pick, too. As far as the receiver with the most catches, I'd strictly be making a guess. And I would probably say Demetrius Robertson. I think he's that talented of a guy. I think he's the guy that catches the quick slant. He's the guy you throw too fast, and then he makes everybody miss. I also think he's a potential deep threat that can stretch the field. But I like what I think D-Rob can do after the catch. And so that would be my guess. And right now that's throwing darts. Just so you know, full disclosure, I don't have a strong feeling about that at receiver. Not as strong as I do the running backs and what they're going to be able to do. Looking this through, D-Rob, Simmons, Pickens. I like Pickens. I'm just not sure. And I'm not sleeping on these guys. I see Jay saying don't sleep on Blaylock. Someone else suggests Pickens. I just think in a pro style of offense and the type of things you want to do, when you've got a third-year quarterback, you want to take advantage of that. You want to take advantage of having a quarterback that can change the play at the line of scrimmage depending on the look and give the hand signal. And the experienced receiver can read that corner and be on the same page as Jake. And that takes some experience. Now, that's not to say that a freshman can't do it, but recent track history suggests that a freshman is not going to be as comfortable in that style of offense as just, hey, go out there and run this route. Now, there's some things that Coley can do to simplify it, and I think will simplify it. But for the most part, I think that when you have a third-year quarterback, one of your advantages is that you can run a more complex offense, especially with this offensive line. These guys can adjust their protections on the fly. Charlie Warner, experienced tight end receiver. Eli Wolf, experienced tight end. Everybody else can make adjustments on the fly. That's where the freshmen, I don't want to say hurt you, but maybe the freshmen aren't up to speed yet. Now, they've got a whole fall camp, so there's plenty of time, and I've heard a ton of great things about Blaylock. I mean, he's been more than any other receiver I've heard about him being an impact guy. We've already heard Kirby say that, he might be the front runner to be a punt returner. Even as a freshman, Kirby's thrown that out there. So I'm not sleeping on him. I just think it's going to take a little bit more time for those freshmen to develop in the offense. Let's see here. Let's take a look. I can't imagine Zamir White being the leading rusher. I just can't imagine it. It'd be an unbelievable story. I just feel like Zamir is going to need some time to work his way back in. And you don't want to rush him, okay? The last thing you want is a third knee injury, okay? The kid's been through a lot, and he's come back from 2. But you got to give him time to get back into that football mode, that football mindset. Again, remember what Lawrence Cager was telling us about his knee injury, and he's a receiver. And they are not as susceptible to knees as running backs in terms of the amount of contact. It's a dynamic position, but running backs are a lot more susceptible to knee injuries. It took Cager a year, and most guys I've dealt with will tell you it takes a full year to get back mentally, even though you're physically cleared. So the last thing Georgia wants to do is rush Zamir White and risk another injury, a third injury. Any news on the defense? I can tell you this, I was over at UGA today and I ran into Jordan Davis on an elevator and he looked incredibly good. And I just basically said, I hope you're having a good off season. Congratulations on being on the freshman All-American team. Very polite young man, very large young man, and looks good. Remember, that was a player that Kirby said in spring drills, was around the bowl time when he was talking about Jordan needing to get in football shape. It's going to be a challenge. He's a big man. But I thought he looked really good today. He looked like he was in shape today. He did not look overweight to me. Now, football shape and to get through this summer, as I was telling you, to get through this paralyzing heat in Athens, for these big guys I still don't know how they do it. I can't impress enough upon you just how tough those workouts were last fall that I saw. And when I told Cager that when I was in South Florida, he's like, man, I'm from South Florida. I'm used to this heat. I said, no, this is going to be a different heat. You don't have an ocean breeze to cool you off. So for a guy like Jordan Davis, a 335-pound guy, to get through some of the heat and some of the workouts that Kirby puts those guys through, that's impressive. So I think he'll be in shape. That would be my news. I think that's really good news. I think the defensive line, to me, I still think that's a bigger concern than the receiving core. As crazy as that sounds, I've got confidence in those receivers and Jake Fromm and those running backs and tight ends. I think there's enough of an arsenal behind that giant, talented offensive line. I think the offense is still fine. I think it'll be the best offense in the SEC. I don't know if they'll have the biggest numbers because it's not like Kirby to hurry up and run up scores in the fourth quarters, but I think it will be the best offense. Defensively, I still have questions about the defensive line, but to see Jordan Davis today and see how good he looked, very impressive. I'm going to put a wrap on this. I really appreciate you all joining me here on the Ingles on the Beat segment. I'm going to do it Mondays, Tuesdays. We haven't really landed on a day. We've been doing it on both days. I appreciate y'all's support and your comments. You're welcome to reach out to me on Twitter at MikeGriffith32. I really like the nice tweets. They kind of help me get through the mean tweets. I think the Clemson fan base is still all over me and wanting to kill me for saying I didn't think they'd run the table in the SEC. But guess what? I don't. And I don't think they want to hear it, but I'm not sure that Clemson would have beat Georgia in the SEC championship game at that time of year, that Georgia, not the one we saw against Texas, okay, but that Georgia that was beating Alabama by 2 touchdowns. It would have been really interesting to see what Clemson would have done in that football game because I thought that Georgia was pretty incredible until DeAndre Walker went out with the injury. That was when the thing tipped. But at MikeGriffith32 on Twitter. You can certainly email me at MikeGriffith032 at Gmail, MikeGriffith032 at gmail.com. And I will look at these comments when the show's over, and I'll even read the negative ones and the mean ones. There's going to be some on there. I get it. And different people have different opinions. I'm accepting of that. But in all seriousness, this Dog Nation group is great. Also, you might want to check out our forum. I don't know if you've done that. Sometimes I'll go into the forum, and I've had a few back and forths with a few of the forum people. It's tough to do that with people with anonymous names. But you know what often will happen is I'll have a back and forth with someone, and then someone will send me a private message and say, hey, my name is, I live here, I just want you to know. And that's cool because when you go on that forum, whether it's me, whether it's Jeff, whether it's Chip, whether it's Connor, whether it's BA, whichever one of us Dog Nation team members is in there, I mean, that's kind of your opportunity to talk with us like you would if you met us out, at AthFest or, sitting at the pub or, down the street at the restaurant, and we just stop and have a conversation. That's what that is for us. It's a chance for us to just converse with you, and it's not a published story. It's not on Twitter. It's not on camera. That's just us rapping. So if you don't go to the Dog Nation forum, I would highly suggest you do. Sometimes Jeff will put recruiting news in there. I say, Jeff, put it on the web. He likes to put the recruiting news in there. He'll put the Intel nuggets in there. You'll see Connor give more takes. He talks a little bit on BA's show, some on mine. You'll see Connor weigh in with some stuff in there and tell you how he feels. Some of this research he did, I think, was in there even maybe before it was online. And I'll go in there. And every now and then, I'll just feel like arguing with somebody. Well, it's not quite that simple. But I'll stand my ground if I disagree with you, and I'll tell you why. So anyway, thanks for this great production today. Connor, he does the production for me on this show. I appreciate it. And all of you for following me here on the Ingles on the Beat segment. And I'll be back next week, Monday or Tuesday, and we'll talk more Georgia football.